My girlfriend told me she was going on a solo wellness retreat to find herself, but when her location pinged from a 5-star resort in Bali booked under another man's name, I decided to fly there myself. I know this sounds paranoid, but when your girlfriend tells you she's going on a solo wellness retreat to find herself, and 2 days later her phone location pings from a 5-star resort in Bali under another man's booking, something in your gut starts screaming louder than logic ever could. I'm 29, and my girlfriend, well, my ex now, Sophie, is 27. We've been together for almost 4 years. She's a travel blogger, or at least that's what she calls herself, though lately it felt more like she was escaping reality than capturing it. A few weeks before she left, she'd been distant, barely laughing at my jokes, scrolling through her phone with that look people get when they're not really there anymore. Then one night, she told me she needed time alone to reconnect with herself and that she'd found a week-long retreat that specialized in silence, meditation, and digital detox. At first, I thought it was a good thing. She'd been burnt out, late nights, editing videos, chasing sponsorships, comparing her life to strangers online. I thought maybe a retreat would help her reset, but there was something off in how she said it. It wasn't her voice trembling from exhaustion. It was like she was rehearsing, like she'd already decided something and was reading me the script. She avoided my eyes, said she'd booked it last minute, and that her phone would be off most of the time. Still, she promised to send me one last text when she landed. I kissed her goodbye at the airport, trying not to overthink it, but the hug felt hollow. You know how someone hugs you with only their arms and not their heart? That's what it was. 2 days later, I got a notification on my phone. We had Find My turned on since she once lost her phone in Lisbon, and I helped her track it. I wasn't snooping. It was automatic. But when I saw that her location showed up as Bali, the Azure Palm Resort, my stomach dropped. I knew that name. I'd seen it on one of those influencer pages she used to follow. It wasn't a wellness retreat. It was a luxury couples resort with private villas, infinity pools, and candlelit dinners on the beach. Out of curiosity, or maybe desperation, I googled it, and within seconds I was staring at pictures of honeymoon suites and couple massage packages. I tried to convince myself maybe she'd upgraded, maybe she wanted a bit of comfort while meditating. But then I noticed something strange. The booking confirmation on our shared calendar wasn't in her name. It said reservation under Daniel R. Daniel. The name punched me in the chest. I'd seen that name before on her Instagram comments. He was one of her photographer friends. The guy she swore was just someone she collaborated with once in Thailand. I remember him because of how she said his name. That subtle, soft tone that people use when they try too hard to sound indifferent. I scrolled through her old posts, and there he was in the tag photos, tall, tanned, the kind of guy who always looked like he belonged on a surfboard. His captions were filled with poetic nonsense like "lost in the light" and "truth lives where silence breathes." Exactly the type Sophie fell for, men who seemed deep because they used metaphors in captions. For the next hour, I sat at my desk frozen. My mind kept running in circles, half of me whispering that I was overreacting, the other half connecting dots I didn't want to see. Maybe she was just using his booking because of a discount. Maybe they were part of a group, but then I saw a tagged story on a mutual friend's account, a quick clip of a dinner table in Bali, laughter in the background, a hand reaching out for a glass of wine, and that hand had the same silver bracelet I'd bought Sophie last Christmas. I paused the video, replayed it, zoomed in. It was her, sitting beside him, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled around me in months. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her leaning into him, the way she used to lean into me when we first met. I imagined her lying in a villa that was meant for two, while I was here trying to convince myself she was healing. I went through every possible scenario in my head, from pretending I didn't know to confronting her over text, but nothing felt satisfying. It all felt too small for the betrayal. Around 3 a.m., I booked a flight. I didn't even think it through. I just acted. I told myself I wasn't going there to cause a scene, just to see the truth with my own eyes. Because if I didn't, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if I'd been wrong. The next morning, I packed a single bag and caught the earliest connection out of Frankfurt. 20 hours of travel gives you too much time to think. I replayed every moment of our relationship in that cramped airplane seat. How we met at a coffee shop when she spilled her lat on my laptop. How she used to call me her calm place. I thought about the first time she said she loved me, half laughing, half terrified, like she wasn't sure love was a thing people could trust. I thought about how lately she'd been talking about finding herself, as if she were a lost tourist and not the woman who'd built a home with me. When I landed in Bali, the air hit me like a wall, humid, thick with the smell of salt and sun lotion. I rented a scooter and rode straight from the airport to the Azure Palm Resort. It was even more extravagant than the pictures, a sprawling cliffside paradise with palm trees bending over glassy pools, couples lounging on white beds, the ocean humming beneath it all. I parked outside and walked toward the reception desk, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape. The woman at the counter smiled, asked if I had a reservation. I told her I was looking for someone staying there. She hesitated, asked for a name. I said, Sophie Hale. She scanned her tablet, then looked up politely. I'm sorry, sir. I don't see that name on any current booking. My throat went dry. Then I said the other name, Daniel Rains. And there it was, a flicker in her eyes. She nodded slowly and said, yes, Mr. Rains checked in 2 days ago. He and his guest are in Villa 6. My stomach twisted. Guest. The word was a blade. I thanked her, pretended to smile, and and walked away before she could ask questions. I didn't even know what my plan was. I just followed the path lined with bamboo and stone lanterns until I reached a villa with a carved wooden door and soft music playing inside. I stood there frozen, listening to laughter that I would have recognized anywhere. Hers. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I wanted to knock, to shout, to demand answers, but my body wouldn't move. Instead, I looked through the thin slit in the curtain. Inside, Sophie was sitting on the bed in a silk robe, her hair still damp from a shower. Daniel stood behind her, rubbing her shoulders, both of them laughing at something on his phone. I don't know how long I stood there watching. Seconds? Minutes? Time stopped existing. The person I loved most in the world was right there, alive, happy, and I'd never felt more invisible. I stumbled back, heart racing, and found myself walking aimlessly toward the beach. The sky was turning gold as the sun set, and the world around me looked like something out of a dream I didn't belong in. I sat on the sand, trying to breathe, trying to decide what the hell to do next. Should I confront her? Should I just leave and let the truth rot inside me? Part of me wanted to march back there and demand an explanation, but another part, maybe the last sane part, knew there was nothing left to say. Still, I couldn't leave. Not yet, not after coming all this way. So I waited, watching the villa from a distance as the night came alive with the sound of waves and music. Around midnight, I saw them step out onto the balcony, glasses of wine in hand, kissing like two people who never had to hide. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe I'd been in love with someone who was never really mine to begin with. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the beach until the sun began to rise, the sky bleeding orange over the water, and every thought in my head was fighting to be louder than the one before it. Part of me kept thinking I'd imagined it, that maybe there was some explanation that didn't make her a liar, that maybe I'd walked into something innocent that only looked wrong from the outside. But when I closed my eyes, I saw her hand on his chest the same way it used to rest on mine when she was tired and half asleep. You can't mistake that kind of intimacy. You can't rationalize it into something it isn't. I wandered back to my rented scooter around 6 a.m. and drove aimlessly through the streets of Ubud, not even sure where I was going. The island was waking up, locals setting up fruit stalls, stray dogs stretching in the shade, tourists with yoga mats walking toward their morning sessions. I found a small cafe tucked away in the trees and ordered a black coffee. The barista smiled, asked if I was on vacation. I said no. I didn't elaborate and he didn't press. The thing about heartbreak is that you wear it on your face like a second skin. People can see it even when you don't say a word. As I sat there staring into my cup, I kept scrolling through my phone, trying to decide whether to message her. My fingers hovered over the screen, but every version of a text I wrote felt small compared to what I'd seen. I know where you are. Who is he? Why did you lie? None of it felt like enough. Words felt useless, almost comical in the face of betrayal. I deleted every draft and put the phone face down. After an hour, I realized I couldn't just sit there. I'd come all this way, and if I left without saying anything, I'd never forgive myself. So I decided I'd confront her, not with anger, but with truth. I wanted to look her in the eyes and ask her to tell me the version of reality she was living in, because clearly it wasn't the same one I'd been in. I waited until evening. When the resort quieted down, I walked the same path toward Villa 6, my heart steady but my hands trembling. I knocked once, softly, no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and after a few seconds, the door opened. Sophie stood there in a loose white dress, her hair tied back, skin sun-kissed, barefoot. She froze when she saw me. For a moment, it was like the world stopped. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she whispered my name, barely, like she wasn't sure it was really me. Behind her, I could see Daniel sitting at the small dining table, shirtless, a confused look on his face. The air between us was heavy, filled with all the things we'd never wanted to believe were possible. I told her I needed to talk. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her, like she was trying to protect him from what was coming. I almost laughed at that, the irony that she was protecting the person she'd betrayed me with. She started to say something, but I cut her off. I asked her why. That's all I said, just that one word. Why? It was enough to make her crumble. She looked down, eyes wet, fingers twisting the hem of her dress. She said she didn't plan for it to happen. She said she was lost. She said she met him during one of her trips months ago and that he understood her in a way I didn't. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Because it wasn't even cruel. It was honest. Brutally honest. She said she tried to fight it, that she thought going on this retreat would help her figure out her feelings, but that when he asked her to come along, she couldn't say no. I asked if she ever planned to tell me. She said she didn't know. And that was when something inside me finally broke. I realized then that this wasn't some dramatic betrayal where anger could fix things. It was something quieter, colder. It was the slow death of a relationship that had already been bleeding long before I noticed the wound. I told her I wasn't there to scream or to make a scene. I just wanted to see the truth with my own eyes so I could stop pretending I still mattered to her. She reached for my hand, crying now, but I pulled back. There wasn't anything left for me to hold on to. I told her she didn't have to explain anymore, that she'd already said enough. Then I left. I walked back down that same path, not looking back once. When I reached the parking area, I got on my scooter and rode with no destination, just driving until the lights of the resort disappeared behind me. The wind was hot against my face, but I didn't feel anything. It was like my body was running on autopilot while my mind replayed everything that had just happened. I ended up at a beach on the other side of the island, somewhere quiet, far from the noise of tourists and music. I sat on the sand, staring at the the ocean, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely empty. Not angry, not sad, just gone. A few locals were setting up a small bonfire nearby, and I watched as they laughed, as if life wasn't this constant ache. I thought about how unfair it felt that the world could keep spinning while mine had just stopped. That night, I booked a cheap hostel room near the airport. The walls were thin, the fan buzzed like a mosquito, and I lay there in the dark listening to my thoughts. I kept wondering if she was lying awake too, if she felt any of this. But the truth is, it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't part of her story now. The next morning, before heading to the airport, I decided to stop by one last place, a small temple overlooking the sea. I'd read somewhere that people came there to leave things behind. There was a tree near the entrance covered in small notes, photos, bracelets. I reached into my bag and pulled out the silver bracelet she'd left at my place once. I tied it to one of the branches and just stood there for a while, watching it sway in the breeze. It felt symbolic, maybe even cliché, but it was the only closure I was going to get. When I finally boarded the flight home, I didn't cry. I just stared out the window as the island shrank beneath the clouds. There was something freeing in the finality of it all. She'd made her choice. I'd seen it with my own eyes, and while it hurt, it also gave me something I didn't have before: clarity. The next few days back home were strange. The apartment felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Her toothbrush was still in the bathroom, her favorite mug on the counter, her clothes hanging in the closet. For a while I couldn't bring myself to touch anything. It was like if I left it all there, maybe she'd walk back in. But she didn't. A week later, she sent me a message. It was long, apologetic, filled with the kind of words people write when they want to make pain sound poetic. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She said she still cared about me. She said she hoped one day I'd understand. I read it twice and deleted it without replying. There wasn't anything left to say. Sometimes silence says more than any message could. But what surprised me most wasn't how much it hurt. It was how quickly I began to feel lighter, like all the weight I'd been carrying for months had finally fallen away. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for her texts or wondering why she seemed distant. I wasn't trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. I started running again, cooking for myself, going out with friends. I even booked a small weekend trip alone, nothing fancy, just a quiet cabin by a lake. And for once, being alone didn't feel like being abandoned. It felt like peace. Still, every now and then, I catch myself thinking about that trip to Bali. Not the confrontation, not even the heartbreak, but the moment I stood outside that villa, watching the person I loved laugh with someone else. It's strange, but that moment taught me more about love than any of the good times ever did, because it showed me what love isn't. It isn't begging to be chosen. It isn't proving your worth to someone who's already looking past you. It's knowing when to let go, even if your heart is still holding on. When I got back home, the silence in my apartment felt suffocating. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet that lets your thoughts breathe. It was heavy, filled with ghosts of things that used to be alive. Her perfume still lingered on the couch. The mug she used for her morning tea was still by the sink. It felt wrong to touch anything, like I'd ruined some fragile illusion that she might walk back through the door. For a while, I did nothing but exist. I went to work, came home, scrolled through my phone, and fell asleep on the couch most nights. People around me must have sensed something was off, but no one said anything. Maybe they figured I just needed time. Maybe they were right. One evening, I started packing up her things. It wasn't planned. I just couldn't stand looking at them anymore. Her sweaters, her books, the framed photo of us from last Christmas. Each box I filled made the apartment feel emptier, but also lighter. When I found the anniversary card she'd written me, I hesitated. Inside, she'd written that she'd never felt so loved, so understood. Reading it now felt like looking at a lie written in cursive. I threw it in the box and taped it shut. I called her sister to pick everything up. She came over quietly, eyes downcast, and thanked me for packing it all. Before she left, she said softly that Sophie wasn't doing as well as I might think, that Bali hadn't fixed anything. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I cared anymore. That night, I walked for hours. The streets were slick from rain, and the air smelled faintly like earth. I ended up at the small park we used to visit, sitting on the same bench where we once planned weekend trips and talked about the future. I stayed there until the sky started to lighten, and for the first time since everything happened, I cried. Not out of anger or longing, just exhaustion. In the following weeks, I forced myself back into a routine. I joined the gym again, cooked meals from scratch, deleted old photos. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt almost normal, and others I'd find myself staring at her contact name, thumb hovering over delete. But slowly, the weight began to fade. Then one afternoon, a month later, I got a message from an unknown number. Just 5 words, "Can we talk sometime soon?" I knew it was her. My heart didn't race. It just sank. I replied after a long pause, "Why?" She said she wanted to explain that she couldn't stop thinking about how things ended. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a cafe by the river. When I walked in, she was already there, smaller somehow, like she'd lost part of herself. We talked for a while, mostly her explaining things I'd already figured out, that she'd been lost, that she didn't mean to hurt me, that it just happened. Those 3 words, "it just happened," stuck with me, because nothing just happens. Every lie, every omission, every message to someone else, it's all a choice. And in that moment, I realized I didn't hate her. I didn't even love her anymore. I just saw her for what she was, human, flawed, and no longer mine. I told her I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to. Then I stood up, wished her well, and left. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, clearer. For the first time in months, months. I didn't feel like a man trying to fix something broken. I just felt like someone finally free to start over. The flight to Bali was long enough for me to replay every possible outcome in my head. By the time I landed, I had gone through the entire emotional spectrum: anger, guilt, fear, denial, until there was nothing left but a hollow, determined calm. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew I couldn't live with uncertainty anymore. At the resort, everything screamed of luxury. The air smelled of frangipani and salt, the pool reflected a flawless sky, and couples lounged in white robes, sipping coconuts. It was surreal, standing there surrounded by beauty while my stomach twisted with dread. I went to the front desk, trying to sound casual as I asked if a Laura Fisher had checked in. The receptionist smiled politely and told me she was indeed there, under a joint booking with a man named David Keller. Hearing that name out loud hit like a punch to the chest. I thanked her, walked away, and tried to keep breathing. David Keller, the same name that had appeared on the flight confirmation she'd accidentally sent me months ago when we were planning a trip to Greece but never took. Back then, she told me it was a mistake, some old work contact she had saved. I'd believed her because I wanted to. I sat by the pool bar for hours, pretending to be another tourist nursing a warm beer. Every time someone walked by, I lifted my head, scanning faces. I told myself I'd just confront her calmly and finally get the truth. But when I saw her walking toward the pool hand in hand with a tall guy in linen pants, I froze. It was her, no doubt about it. She looked relaxed, glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years, like the weight of her old life had been shed. They laughed, touched easily, like a couple that had been together far longer than a week. I couldn't move. It wasn't the betrayal that hit me hardest. It was how happy she looked. I followed them from a distance through the resort, down a path that led to private beach cabanas. My hands shook. I wasn't thinking clearly, just acting on a numb instinct. When they stopped to take pictures by the water, she turned her head slightly, and for a split second, her eyes met mine. The smile vanished. She froze mid-laugh, and the guy beside her looked confused, following her gaze until he saw me too. I could see his expression shift, protective, defensive. She took a hesitant step forward, then stopped again, torn between them. I didn't move closer. I just waited. Finally, she walked over, barefoot in the sand, her face pale. The sound of the ocean was too calm for what was happening. She asked what I was doing there, her voice trembling somewhere between anger and disbelief. I told her I came because her location had pinged here and I needed to know the truth. She tried to explain, something about confusion, needing space, how David was someone she'd known before me, how she didn't plan for it to happen this way. Every word blurred together, meaningless noise carried by the wind. I barely heard her. I just watched her eyes dart back to him, searching for reassurance. That told me everything. I left before she could say more. Walked past the pool, past the reception desk, out through the heavy wooden gates. The air outside felt heavier, like I'd stepped into a different world. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just kept walking until the resort disappeared behind the trees. Later that night, I sat alone on the beach, watching the lights of the resort flicker in the distance. I could still picture her silhouette beside him, laughing under the same moonlight I was staring at. I realized then that I hadn't come to Bali to win her back or to expose her lies. I came because I needed the final push to let her go. When I booked my return flight the next morning, I didn't feel relief, just an empty, strange sort of peace.